Let's take a breath together. It's a wonderful life, right? It's a wonderful life, right? Yeah, it's a wonderful life. And you know, that theme for the month is inspired by that ubiquitous movie this time of year. It's a Wonderful Life. And you know, the subtopic or the sub-theme of that, It's a Wonderful Life, is that your life matters. Your life matters. That's what the whole point of the story was. Your life matters. And so that's what we're looking at this month. It's a wonderful life. It really is. And how we get so busy and caught up in the busyness and the challenges and the craziness that goes on around us sometimes, that we forget that it's a wonderful life. Despite all that, it's a wonderful life when we can stay present to it. And so we're talking about and reminding you and reminding ourselves this month that it's a wonderful life. It really is a wonderful life. And it's up to us to experience all the gifts that we have in this gift-giving season, the gifts that we can give ourselves. Last week, we talked about the gift of a day off. And I was referring to the book, I don't have it over there, but I was referring to the book 24/6, The Power in Unplugging One Day a Week. How many people unplugged last week at all? Okay. How many people unplugged, maybe not for a whole day, but unplugged at all? Okay, that's a good show of hands. Unplugging is so important, and for those of you who didn't hear us last week, we were talking about unplugging particularly from electronic devices and those kinds of things that, oh, somebody's really thrilled back there. Mary Beth, thank you. But unplugging from those things that keep us so caught up and keep our attention and our focus and our awareness so caught up in looking down and looking at a screen and always being on, that we forget to sometimes just unplug and just allow ourselves to be. And so I encouraged us to not only unplug from those electronic devices, but unplugging from anything that would keep us from being fully present to ourselves, that would keep us from being fully present to that divine presence that is always right where we are. And so if you find anything in your life that's keeping you focused elsewhere other than in the present moment and present with the presence, then we need to just unplug from that. If it's not for a full day, as long as you can, just so that we can get centered and grounded and anchored in the truth that we know, and get centered and grounded and anchored in who we really are. And so that, for me, meant turning off the TV before I go to sleep, because sometimes it stays on all night, and that's not a good thing. And then I dream about what they're talking about on TV. You know, you do that, and then I wake up feeling really tired and really worn out, depending on what channel it was on. So I have really been unplugging from that this past week, and it's really been wonderful. And one night I didn't do it, and the next morning I woke up and I could really tell the difference. And so unplugging really does make a difference. The name of the book is, as I said, 24/6, and we usually live 24/7 lives. She invites us to do one day off, which would mean that we would live a 24/6 life, and she being the author of the book, Tiffany Schlein, I think her name is. And so just beginning to really look at, again, continuing to unplug one day a week, giving ourselves the gift of a 24/6 life. And so this week, I'm talking about the gift in willingness. The gift in willingness. Willingness, readiness, being prepared, the quality of being prepared, being available. That's what willingness is about. And you know, there's a gift in willingness, a tremendous gift. I have heard from several people this week who told me all the reasons why they couldn't unplug last week. And they were all good reasons, but they were all excuses. They were all excuses. Because if you can't unplug for the whole day, if you can just unplug for an hour, or if you can unplug for 5 minutes every hour, or however you can do it. But when we find ourselves with these excuses for why we can't do things, that's a sign of our unwillingness to do it. That's a sign of our unwillingness to do it. So I'm inviting us this week to look at and really practice and really experience the gift in willingness, being willing. dropping our defenses, dropping our resistance, letting go of those things that we fight against, the things that make us fight and say no and block, and just being willing. Being willing means just saying yes, taking a deep breath, letting go of the resistance, letting go of the fight, just saying yes. Willingness is a gentle way of saying surrender. Surrender, sometimes people have a difficult time with the word surrender and the concept of surrender. Well, that's what willingness is. It's just being willingness to go forward, willingness to do what's before you to do, willingness to do what we are called to do. And when we are doing things or serving or whatever, giving out of a sense of duty, there's not so much willingness there. It's a sense of obligation. There's not so much freedom in that. Because what willingness does, it opens our hearts. It opens our entire being. It opens our, recognize your unwillingness. Sometimes we don't recognize unwillingness. Sometimes we think it's anything else but us being unwilling. Sometimes we think it's circumstances beyond our control. Sometimes we think it's situations. Sometimes we think it's other people. Sometimes we think it's all kinds of stuff. God. And it's just our unwillingness. Recognize your own unwillingness. Sometimes it's unwillingness to let go of attachments. Sometimes letting go of attachment, practicing non-attachment, the way we want things to be, the way things used to be, the way we want it to look, the way it's supposed to look, the way it should be, and all that stuff that gets us hung up and keeps us from being willing to take a breath and move forward and deal with it the way that it is. And when we can do that, there's so much freedom that becomes available to us. I have 3 appointments that I have to have every week. 2 of them I have on Friday mornings, and they're standing appointments. And the 3rd one I've been trying to get on Friday mornings, and I have not been able to. So it's been like catch as catch can, sometimes on Friday evenings. And so the person with whom I have been trying to get this appointment, the standing appointment, said to me, I can see you on Wednesday morning. And you could be my first person that I see on Wednesday morning. So I'm like, no, I want Friday morning because I have this time and this time and this time for other things, and I want this appointment at this time on Friday mornings. And she said, I can't do Friday mornings because I have other appointments at that time. And then I went through this whole thing. As long as I've been coming, as long as I've been knowing you, you don't seem to be making special arrangements for me. And I carried on. And she said, I can see you on Wednesday mornings. I'll even come in a half an hour earlier to see you on Wednesday mornings. I don't want Wednesdays. I want Friday. And I want you to do it on Fridays. And she said, I cannot do it on Fridays. So we've been going back and forth with this for months. For months. And so I just decided, you know what? I'm going to go to somebody else. I'll show her. I'll just go to somebody else. I didn't want to go to anybody else. I wanted to go to her, but I wanted her to come when I wanted her to be there. And she's saying, I can't jump over all these other people because this is the time you can come, but I can come on Wednesday mornings. So anyway, we went round and round and round, and I have been really ticked off about it, and I've been walking around with, resistance and grudges and thinking that she really is overlooking me and she really isn't giving me special favor. And she's constantly saying, I can see you on Wednesday morning early. And finally, as I was going through last week, just thinking about the different talks and topics for the month, and willingness kept coming up. And I thought, willingness, unwillingness. And I finally said, you know what? If I can go on Wednesday morning and she can come in earlier, how wonderful would that be? Because I still get done what I need to have done. She just can't do it in the time that I was so attached to and on the day that I was so attached to. And so I've been going through all this angst and all this resistance and all this grudging and all this stuff for months about this Friday morning that she did not have time for. And I finally said to her last Friday evening when I went, you know what? I'm going to come on Wednesdays. And she nearly fell out. She didn't know what had happened to me because we've been tussling with this for months. And I finally decided, you know what, I'm going to come on Wednesdays. And she said, yeah, I can come early. And you'll be the first. Nobody's here but us. And it felt, once I made that decision, it felt so easy. It felt so freeing to give up my resistance and to give up my attachment to her doing it at the time I wanted her to do it, on the day I wanted her to do it, kicking all other people off her calendar, off her schedule, so that I could have the time I wanted. And you know, when situations like that come up, I'm always asking the question, and I always invite you to ask the question, what spiritual quality is seeking to express? What spiritual quality is seeking to express when we get into situations like that? For me, it was ease. The spiritual quality was ease, because I was saying, I need ease in my life. I need to come on Fridays and do this, and this on Fridays, because that's ease. And Spirit is like, this is how ease can look. This is how ease can look. If you can just give up your attachment and just open up and just allow ease to reveal itself, it can reveal itself. And so you know what? Once I gave up my attachment to Friday morning at a certain time, I can breathe easier. Wednesday mornings work. It's just perfect, and it feels easy. It's easy because that's the only thing I have to do on Wednesday morning before I come here. So it's easy. But I was so attached to the way I wanted it to look. I was so attached to what ease was supposed to look like. I was so attached to what ease was supposed to feel like, and the package it was supposed to come in, that I didn't allow it. I didn't have the space for ease to come through. And so I tell you that, and I tell you these little peccadillos that I have, so that you just, I think it helps you to look at your own life, how little things hang us up, how little things keep us from experiencing the wonderful life that life is, how little things keep us blocked. And you know, little things on top of little things on top of little things on top of little things get to be big things. And they get to be those kinds of things that block us from the freedom that we can experience in our lives, because that's what willingness is all about. It's about freedom. It's about being free to experience this wonderful life. It's about looking at, how can I free myself up to experience the ease? And so by me just simply saying yes to a Wednesday morning appointment just frees me up. I can let go of the fight. I don't have to fight with her any longer. I don't have to tussle about it. I don't have to talk to other people about how I can't get this appointment on Friday mornings. And I know the people that I have talked to about it are really happy about that. Because they're probably tired of hearing it, because I was tired of talking about it. But we get caught up in those kinds of things. So I'm inviting you to recognize your unwillingness. Recognize when you're unwilling to change, because that's what that was about. Being unwilling to change, being unwilling to give up my attachment to the way things should be, unwilling to give up my attachment to the way I wanted things to be, unwilling to give up my attachment to sort of pointing the finger of blame at her because she wasn't recognizing me as being special. All that stuff about one little appointment that I could just say, yeah, let's just change it to Wednesday. And then once I said that, all kinds of stuff opened up for me. Most of all, I could just open my heart. I didn't have to go in a little ticked off every time I went in to see her. I could just go in and just be my usual, normal, loving self. And that made it so much easier. And so I invite you, look at the places in your life where you're unwilling. What is it that you're unwilling to do? Recognize your own unwillingness, because that's how you free yourself up. Because when we get willing, as I said, we surrender, and there's freedom in surrender. We're saying yes. We're basically saying yes. Let's take a breath. The second thing is just playing the hand you're dealt. Playing the hand you're dealt. playing the hand you dealt. You know, we teach in Science of Mind that there's not anything that we can experience that we don't have the consciousness for. We cannot experience anything that we are not aligned in consciousness for, aligned with in consciousness. And oftentimes we take issue with that because we think, well, but that's not my consciousness, this experience that I'm having. Why am I experiencing this? Because that's not what my consciousness is like. And you know, it's not always about our own individual consciousness. It's sometimes about race consciousness. And race consciousness, as we know, is about the human race, not about different ethnicities and whatever, even though that may be a part of it, that may be a race conscious belief in certain individual races. But in the human race, there's a belief system, there's a consciousness into which we are all involved and to which we are all subject at times. And what we have to know is that in order to avoid what happens and what we experience as a result of race consciousness, we have to make a conscious decision that we're not going to be subject to race consciousness. I'm not going to be subject to, I get sick every year this time. I get sick every year this time. How many people have heard that? How many people have believed that? How many people have thought that? How many people have said that? I get sick every year this time. Well, if there was something out there, if there was some truth to that there's sickness every year at this time, then everybody would be sick. It wouldn't just be you or you or you or you. It's somehow we have made ourselves subject to race-conscious beliefs. And we also have told those stories because our stories become a part of our race-conscious belief or as a result of our race-conscious belief or as a result of our belief. And many of those stories are as a result of race-conscious beliefs. If I get wet, I'm going to really get sick. Well, if that were true, then all of us would get sick when we get wet. So it doesn't work that way. It just depends, again, as to whether or not we are buying into that, whether or not the stories that we tell become our beliefs, and then our beliefs become our experiences. And that's what happens. So then when we find ourselves in these situations, then we have to look at where we are right then and decide, okay, this is where I am. This is what I mean about dealing with playing the hand you're dealt. This is the hand I'm dealt. It may be a result of race consciousness, my own consciousness, whatever the case may be. And it's what do I do now to move from this place? Because we can go any place from where we are. We can go any place from where we are. We can go any place from where we are. We just have to recognize where we are, and then we know, oh, this is where I am. This is where I want to go. And so it's called also blooming where you're planted. This is where I am. How do I bloom right here with all this stuff that I don't want around me, all this stuff that I'd like to change, all this stuff? How do I bloom right here where I'm planted? How do I play this hand that I'm dealt right here? Well, first I can start to change my belief about it. I can start to change my story about it. I can stop talking about, I get sick every time, this time of year, all the time. I get sick when I get wet, or when it rains on me, or whatever the case may be. When we start to change those stories and change our beliefs, then we start to change our experience. But we cannot change our experience until we get over those stories, till we outgrow those stories. There's an old metaphysical saying that you have to outgrow the space where you are before you can move to the next place. You have to outgrow where you are. Because if you don't outgrow that place in consciousness, you find yourself right back there. You find yourself right back there. You ever notice how certain things have happened throughout your life, and you change and you change and you change, you look up and you're right back where you started, you're right back in that same situation again? That's because the consciousness didn't change. We didn't outgrow that space. And the only way we can keep from falling back into the same place is we got to do something different. We got to change the consciousness. We got to change the consciousness. And when we can change the consciousness, then we can have a different experience. And so outgrowing the space where you are, outgrowing the space where you are, blooming where you're planted, so you can outgrow that space and move on to the next space. And move on to the next space. You know how people hit the lottery? You see these stories on TV where people are lottery winners and they have all this money, and then a few years later they don't have any money. Consciousness. They didn't have the consciousness for the big rich lifestyle. They didn't have the consciousness for that. So they had to come back to the consciousness that they had, because the consciousness that obtains sustains. That's what Ernest Holmes says. The consciousness that obtains sustains. And if you don't have the consciousness to obtain whatever it is, you cannot sustain it. And it's real simple. That's what we have to know, that we have to bloom where we're planted, outgrow the place where you are in consciousness so that we can move on to the next place. But we got to be willing to do that. We got to be willing not only to know what we want, but we got to be willing to want what we want. Because we can say all day that we want something or that we desire something, but if we aren't willing to have it, then we can't have it. We can't sustain it. And so it requires us to look at, am I really willing to have this? Do I really want this, and am I willing to have this? That's really important for us to know. Let's take a breath. The third thing is being willing to work through the consciousness gap. Being willing to work through the consciousness gap. There's a such thing called a consciousness gap. You know, you can pray for something and work towards something and work towards something and know that there's been a change in your consciousness and there's not a change in your experience. That's the consciousness gap. Sometimes it takes a minute for our experience to catch up with our consciousness. And the important thing for us to do during that time is to continue to do the work. Continue to do the work. If you've started to meditate more and you started to do your spiritual practice more and you've started to really practice the presence of God more and you've started to really, really connect with people in a different kind of way and the kinds of things that we've been talking about more and more and more, and your experience does not seem to have changed, you're thinking things are just the same as they always were. That's not true. Things are changing. We just can't always see it. We just can't always experience it. And that's not the time to stop. Because there's a consciousness gap. You know, as within, so without. It has to be that way. As within, so without. It takes a minute for our outer world to catch up with our inner world. It takes a minute for our outer world to catch up with our inner world. So if you've been doing the work, if you've been changing, making those changes in your life, if you've been really moving forward in a positive way and in a willing way, then be willing to continue to do the work, regardless as to what the appearance may be. Continue to do the work. Continue to do the work. Continue to move forward. I had a chance to see this in the 4T class, where people were tithing in the 4T class, and many people were having great experiences as a result of their tithing. Some people were not, and then they stopped tithing once the class was over. And then some of those people come to me and say, all these different things are happening. And I said, are you still tithing? And they say, no. I'm just like, you got to do the work. But it wasn't working. Yes, it was. Just because you didn't see it. When you plant a seed, just because you don't see the blossom right away, doesn't mean that it's not growing. It doesn't mean that it's not working. It just means that we have to constantly tend that garden. We have to constantly tend the garden of our consciousness. We have to consciously tend the garden of our hearts. We have to consciously tend the garden with our spiritual practice and the work that we've been doing. And we have to be willing to do that. Even when we don't see the results that we want, we got to be willing to do it. Because you know what? One day you'll look up and there'll be a little blossom. There'll be a little awakening. There'll be a little shift. There'll be something that'll be different. And you'll get to realize that, you know what? This stuff does work. This stuff really does work. But we got to be willing to work it. And so I invite you to be willing to work through the consciousness gap. And I don't care how, as I said, how much you've been praying and meditating and doing all the chanting and doing all the work that you do, and you feel like you don't see a result, keep going. Don't stop now. We've been reading the treatment for supply for a year now. Keep going. Don't stop now. Many people have had miraculous results. Some people are having slower results, but people are having results. And you are having results, because if your life, as Ernest Holmes says, is tending toward a higher place, or tending toward getting better, those are the results. It may not happen, boom, in a flash, overnight, and it could. And it may be a slow getting better. Things are slowly getting better, gradually. There's a gradual sense of well-being that we're having. Those are the kinds of things that are changing that we don't always see. We don't always notice until we take a moment to look back and say, wow, I used to be over here. I used to think like that. And we realize how much we've changed without even knowing it. So being willing to work through the consciousness gap and to be aware of it and keep working through it and to keep working through it and to keep working through it. That's what we're doing in this community. As we continue to be a thriving community, as we continue to be a community that's dwelling in the land of plenty, that was a big gap between where we were and the land of plenty. And now we're there in the land of plenty. Now we got to dwell there. Because we've always been in the land of plenty, all of us. We just got to experience it and open up and being willing to have it, willing to own it, willing to be it. And so that's what I'm inviting you now this week, to give yourself the gift in willingness. Because in the act of willingness itself, there's a gift. And so I invite you to really, really, really give yourself that gift along with that day off that you're giving yourself. Let's take a breath and let's take a moment to go into prayer. And so just knowing absolutely that there's but one power, one life, one mind, one breath. I know that it is God. I know that it is my life. I know that it is the life of each of us here this day. How grateful I am to know this truth as I speak the word for each of us here this day. Just speaking a word of healing on every level. Healing of old ideas, old beliefs, old patterns, old habits, old ways of being in the world. Opening our hearts, opening our minds to this healing so that everything is made new within us, within our body temples, within our bodies of affairs, within our relationships, within our world on this planet. Everything is made new as we just open our hearts and open our minds and say yes to God. And our yes is our willingness to change, our willingness to do something different, our willingness to have things be different, our willingness to move forward with ease and with grace. And when we move into that place of willingness, then we do move forward with ease and grace, knowing that God always goes before us, making straight and easy our way, laying it out for us. And so I'm accepting perfect peace, perfect wholeness, perfect love, perfect light, perfect willingness for each of us this day. And as I open this circle of prayer, I pause momentarily so that you may speak the names of anyone you'd like held in prayer. You may speak their names silently or loud, and you may speak them now. And so for all those whose names were spoken here this day, I know that God is right where each of them is, blessing and keeping them. I know that healing is happening in each and every life. For I know that God is in the midst of every circumstance, every situation, so that anyone on this planet needing a prayer this day, God is. God is. God is. That's all we ever need to know. And so I simply say, thank you, God. Thank you, Infinite Presence. Thank you, Divine Mother. Thank you, Spirit, for everything. I'll just allow it to be now. And so it is.